Hello. Today's project is going to be a Super Nintendo restoration, minor restoration. Specifically, this Super Nintendo. Now, this particular Super Nintendo is a special one to me because this is my own childhood unit that I bought with allowance money, saved up over a long period of time. And it was with me all through growing up. Never failed, but it has seen better days. You can see that it's yellowed, and it had a mishap through frequent travel where its prongs from the AC adapter punched through the case one time. This has always bothered me. So I'm going to try and give this unit the respect I feel it deserves. This is one of my favorite consoles. It's not my first console. I got into console gaming on the NES, but the Super Nintendo, not only did I buy it with my own money that it took me forever to save, but I had probably the most titles of any console I've owned that were really worth the money, I would say. Or at least I felt they were at the time. So we're going to try and give this one some honor with a nice clear case rather than trying to restore this broken one. And because this is a very old unit, we're going to replace the capacitors on it. Now, electrolytic capacitors fail eventually, always. And this is very old. So even if this unit works right now, you might say, well, why mess with it? And we're going to determine whether it works in a moment. The reason you mess with it is because these will inevitably fail. And failure can be anything from just doesn't work that well anymore, which is the ideal case, or it can be, explodes and leaks corrosive material all over the board and destroys the traces and makes for quite the mess and repair. We don't want that one. So before it fails, I'm going to replace the capacitors. Having said that, I still like to see where you're starting from as a baseline. So let's plug this guy in and see where it is right now. So I'm going to just connect power and video. Nothing fancy. And we are going to put in a game and see what happens. A whole lot of nothing. Let's try. I don't know how clean this game is after all these years. Okay, so we probably have a dirty cartridge slot. That is a thing. But it appears to be working fairly well. I think the game is meant to be that dark. Yeah, that looks about normal. I haven't played this game in forever, probably since it was new. Okay, so we're starting from a good place. The worst we can do is destroy it, I suppose. But we'll hope for the best. Right, so now onto the disassembly. Getting into the Super Nintendo is not particularly hard, but it does require some game bit screws, unfortunately. And then we can pull away the top case. Now, if you noticed, the new case doesn't have a lot of the hardware, so we're going to have to transplant the door and the buttons into here. So we're going to come back to this later and do some disassembly. If this were a regular refurb, we'd be doing that anyway, because you want to tear everything down so you can wash every little piece. And now we have the rather unglamorous looking insides. Now, I didn't really watch a guide on how to tear this apart, but I think we can figure it out. The eject lever is relatively simple. We don't want to lose that spring. We'll fish it out. A smart person might pay attention to how the spring was connected to begin with. I'm going to set this aside because we'll need that as well in the new shell. This model of Super Nintendo has a separate daughter board for the sound. I believe later models, probably the one chip, don't have this anymore. I don't really know if there's a major pro or con either way in terms of what they produce, but this just lifts off of this socket connector. Try to go straight up. I believe there are capacitors in here we will have to get at, though, so we'll have to figure out how to open up this shell. It looks like it's just a snap fit. So, feels like it, if I pull here, yeah, that'll just come right off. No big deal. But the top half looks to be soldered into the case, which is not a big deal. We can remove that. We'll come back to that. As for the rest of the teardown, now we should be able to remove the rest of the board straight up and out. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but most of the capacitors are hiding under this hidey hole here, the heat sink for the power rail. That will require a little additional disassembly. But we're done here. All that's left, as you can see, is the shield and then the base itself. So we can set this to the side. Now this shield is held down by 4 screws that are actually exposed on the bottom of the board, but it's also screwed to this MOSFET, this rail here, to act as a heat sink for it. So we don't want to forget this and break or dislodge it. So I'm going to unscrew it first. That should allow us to just remove the heatsink. and gets us to the rest of the capacitors. Now, this Super Nintendo, compared to other retro consoles, is a little interesting because you can see it has a lot of these SMD style capacitors. Surface mount device, I think. A lot of older consoles mostly use these through-hole style. Console 5, who's a wonderful supplier of recapping kits, sells these kits in two varieties for the Super Nintendo. An SMD kit, which is what I'm going to be doing here, where you replace like for like. But they also sell a leaded kit, or leaded kit, I guess is what in this case, where if they replace these capacitors, these SMDs, with an equivalent that's got leads, the legs here, because those are easier to work with if you don't have the right tools or the confidence in working with these surface mounts. I don't really have a stance on one versus the other. I'm not going to argue that one is better or worse. If you feel more comfortable doing one over the other, go for it. For my own Super Nintendo, I chose to replace it with the same type it already has. For this, I like to open the kits and take stock of both which capacitors I've been given and make sure I can identify where they're going. Be careful of little ones like this that are loose. We don't want to lose. We want to lose any of them, but double check that the bag is actually empty and set it aside. Now we have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 total caps here. How many do we see on the board? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And likely some of them remain in the audio board. So I went and looked into it, and while I was starting to look into it, I noticed that while, yes, there are solder points connecting the shield to the board, the top of it is also just snapped on here and you can pull it off. So, overthinking things. And indeed, here are two capacitors. These are through hole, and we have access to the bottom, so those should be very, very straightforward to do. The point of all this is that I prefer to get the whole picture of what it is I'm going to be doing before I start to do it. So I don't have questions partway through or realize I made a mistake somewhere along the way. So after consulting Console 5's very useful wiki, discover that the only trick to this kit is that they give us one extra capacitor, this guy. And the idea here is to address a common failure or problem, I guess, in Super Nintendos, where the power rail here, it's believed that it doesn't quite supply enough power during DRAM refresh, which causes a white bar to be seen in the scene, especially if it's a mostly black scene. So one of the solutions people use is to wire a capacitor between the center and the right leg of this rail here. So they've included that in the kit for us. Once accounting for that, we've got every capacitor accounted for. So nothing left but to start trying to replace them. So there's a number of ways we can go about this. I think I'm going to get rid of this guy first, because he's tall and in the way of access to these down here. It's hard to tell from this, but there's quite a bit of height to this one. It's helped because there aren't that many through-hole capacitors, and there certainly aren't a lot of large ones, so we won't lose track of which one that is. But before anything, I like to go in and mark these things, the ones I intend to replace. So that you can't possibly start questioning yourself, because a lot of the time the replacement looks more or less identical to the original. And you never know when you get called away, you know, your kid's up, the dog's bark, who knows? You don't want to get distracted and forget, did I do that one? Did I not? So take a Sharpie and mark the ones that are coming out. Another trick you can do is on these leaded or through-hole capacitors. Usually, as you can see here, the board will indicate positive, negative, and then the negative stripe on the capacitor tells you the negative side. Ordinarily, the board will be marked. I've seen few cases where it's not. I haven't seen this in consoles before, but I have seen it in other electronic devices, however, where for whatever reason, the silk screen marking is wrong, backward, and disagrees with how the capacitor was installed. For those reasons, pick a direction of the board that is up. So I'm just going to make it the same. Pointing up is this way. That way, if I wonder whether or not the markings are correct, I can compare the orientation that the capacitor had, the original capacitor had, with what the markings say. Now, in this case, I'm looking at it ahead of time. I can see that the board is absolutely correct. This is probably a little bit of extra paranoia, but when it comes to this stuff, I like to do the equivalent of measure twice, cut once. Which is also why I do all that inventorying on exactly what I'm doing and which capacitors I have before I start. Because even if I've done a console before, no matter how many of them I have done before, it's not something I'm doing every day on the same model, and there's a lot of variations of these consoles, I want to make sure I'm not going to make a dumb mistake. Save a lot of time later by making sure you avoid problems up front. And in this case, let's not forget the audio board. I'm just going to mark these two, although this will be hard to forget. Let's call the connector the upside of the board. But since I'm thinking about it, I can quickly eyeball this, and I see the plus. And if you can see it there, if I pull this back. I can see the plus markings here is accurate. Plus marking is accurate. So I marked the top towards the connector, what I decided was the top, but we'll be fine. Nintendo did a good job here. So let's go ahead. I'm going to get rid of this big guy, which means flipping it over and figuring out which contacts hold it, which pins. I'm going to be desoldering this with a Hako FR301 desoldering gun. Probably overkill for this particular job. There aren't a lot of through-hole capacitors to begin with, but once you have one of these things, it's kind of hard to not want to use it. They're really, really nice. And I'm not getting sponsored in any way to say that. I just really like this. It saved me a lot of time. Let's see if I can do this so that you can see it at all. And we should be good. Okay, there we go. That one's out. Put them aside. It's out. No big deal. And we want to inspect afterward. This looks good. Sometimes you can't see a cap that has burst until you've removed it. So always be on the lookout for any electrolytic fluid that's might have escaped. So we make sure to clean it up as soon as possible. Well, we can proceed and try and remove these guys. I don't think Nintendo glues these, but it might take a minute for the heat to get underneath fully. There's one. Oops, I'm not on the camera, am I? Don't want to pull until it's ready, because then you'll get the what's it called? The pads that will come up with it. We don't want that. We've got a little bit of plastic left here. That's okay. I'll just come right off. Now, there's a bunch of ways we can go about this. I think what I'm going to do is clean these pads off first. Can you even see this? I'm doing a terrible job of letting you see this stuff. I was saying I'm going to clean these pads off and I don't know what the composition is of this original solder, so let's just clear it off and we can start again. Be gentle with it. We don't want to the last thing we want is to rip the pads. A little blurry there for you guys. Let's try and fix that. Pretty clean. You notice if the positive and negative are too hard to see, you've also got this nice shape outline here that matches the plastic base on the caps themselves. Well, let's see about cleaning that pad up a little bit, because we're not going to be able to get back under here. Where's my alcohol? We're going to use isopropyl. Just clean that up a little bit. Even though we'll probably have to do that immediately again after the flux, but I don't know what's already here, and I don't like the look of it. I want to be clean. Anyway, one thing we could do here is pre-tune the pads and then just basically melt the capacitor down into it. That's a perfectly fine way to do it. What I want to try is, first of all, I'm going to position it with tweezers because it's very small. A bit, just a touch of solder on my iron. We're going to put it into position. I'm just going to tack it in with it. Just like that. Now it's flat. Now we can come over here. Oops, so you can see. Now the position looks pretty good. You can see the little leg. Now we add a touch of flux. Just a touch, which looks like a flood on there. And then we finish this side up nicely. Looks good. We'll come over to this side. And we're gonna clean up this joint because the tacking is not meant to be final. Let's make sure there's some flux here. You never can have enough flux for a joint you care about. Let me turn a light on here. Nope, too much light. What about this light? The shadows don't help. It doesn't look too lovely, does it? That's a lot better. Okay, and do the same thing for the next one. Just a little bit of solder on the tip. Just a touch, enough to tack. Get this into position. I'm not even showing you. I need to get in the habit of that. Just enough to be able to tack. Line up. Tack it in. Doesn't need to be perfect. We're floating a little bit. Just adjust it. Like that. Maybe we want to move up a little if we're really picky. Maybe my tweezers need a better grip. It's okay. I'm just being overly picky. There, that looks like the right spot. Sorry, I'm not used to doing this on camera too much. It's a little extra thing to keep track of. I'll get the hang of it though. All right, now again, we are fluxing and we're gonna finish this in. Get a nice little ball going there. Same on the other side. Careful not to hit the rail or anything. Just a touch of flux. Flux prevents oxidation. I don't like when I get those spiky guys. Bugs me. All right. You don't have to clean up no clean flux. That's the point of it, but they just call it that because it's not conductive. It won't hurt anything, but it's tacky in the sense that, you know, you can feel it, it's sticky, and it just doesn't look professional. So, I like to clean it out when possible. Okay, so now we've done 2 of them. Wasn't too bad, was it? We can do this through hole one if we like, because it's not too in the way of these, but you know, it's just the one. Why not put it off? There's no rush to do it. No rush at all. So these 4 are all the same, right? 100, 6, 15. Yep. And conveniently, they're in a 4 blister pack here. They're equivalent replacements. So we can do all of them as one group. Right? Get the braid back out. Clean up all those points. So I like to go from top down, from this perspective at least, to give me some room for holding the things. But the problem here is always going to be there's not a lot of space between these 2. So no matter how you tackle that, that's a little tricky. It's hard to get in there. Let me put 2 in position and show you. Nothing for that, but to just be careful, really. It would be easy to accidentally bridge those, and we don't want that. But having said that, it's what we have to work with. So let's start again. Tacking it in. Try to line it up right. Do as I say and not as I do, I suppose. Just come down here and lightly dab, and it'll set. Good. Now we can do this side while we have decent access to it. Because we won't for long. That should be perfect. Gives us plenty of room to do the other side in a second. Oops, those are the first two. There we go. Finish this end. Probably didn't even need more. That's good. Now we are going to tack in. Keep ending up on the wrong set. All right, let's try that again. Extra little fresh blob here. Act like I know what I'm doing. I did it again. But this time we're tacked in. A little bit more there would be good. Oh, that's nice enough. All right. How's that look? Up on the skin here? Is that what that is? Ah, nice. That looks good. Keep going. We're doing fine. I guess we'll do the same thing here. Just a touch on the iron. Position the capacitor. Where we want it. It would be nice if we could use a board holder to keep the board from flipping around, but it's got some awkwardly sized pieces that make that difficult. Okay. That should be, yep, tacked in good. Some flux. And just a touch to get it into position. All right. That looks a little too little. That should be nice. Is this guy? Might not have gotten it totally flat because he seems like he wants to pop up. Let's make sure he's down well. Sorry for being a camera noob here, guys. Done this stuff lots of times without a camera, and there's more to think about when you've got a camera. Okay, we look pretty good now. Probably easier to tack this guy in on the freer side. Probably should have done that the other one. Darn it. Okay. I think the soldering would be the hard part, not the tweezers. Let's slide that out just ever so slightly to give us as much room as possible on the hard side. That's a gross joint, but we're going to fix it. Woof. Lost some socks in there, it looks like. Can't blame it on being anybody else's this time. And then up here we will clean that up a bit. That's much nicer. This one looks a little dry, but I don't like trying to get in there. Oh, much better. Perfect. Okay. My seems to work better if I grab these from the base to the degree possible. Good enough. Maybe I ought to just tack in the other one while I'm here. This one is harder because there is a port right next to us that is plastic. That is a poor one, but all we're doing is tacking, so it's fine. All right. They're just tacks right now. Just a little more here would be good. And this one's a little tricky to get to straight on without perturbing anything else. But we can do it. I don't like those points if I can avoid them. It's nice and shiny at least. Certainly looks like, yeah. So let's get that one off and replace it quick. Be careful of this port here. We don't want to melt that. It's going to be old brittle plastic. Well, it won't functionally hurt anything other than our pride. Hard to touch it without knocking it over. All right, there we go. That's a good grip. Don't touch anything extra with your iron. Make sure we're level. See, I knew that was floating. Perfect. And now clean it up on this side. Really looks pretty good, actually. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Maybe just reflow it with a little bit of flux. So see if it can get any shinier, but we don't need more. Yeah, perfect. Can't ask for better than that. We still have this one to get rid of. This one has a different rating, which I believe is the same as this free floater they gave us here. Yeah. I believe that's right. Because all the others are accounted for. This is our last SMD cap. So let's just be about it. Whoa. Well, see, now that's bad. That's exactly what this is supposed to helping me avoid doing. That right there was... Why doesn't this one want to come off? I'm not sure what the problem here is. Well, that was a popping capacitor. We don't want to happen. But could have been worse. It didn't go all over anything inside. We can fix it. See, you want these to come off quickly. I'm trying to do heat directly. Now, this is also why a lot of people recommend twisting them off or cutting them off instead. So, because applying heat to them like that is also a risk for this exact thing. I'm going to thoroughly clean this with isopropyl to make sure we don't have any residual residue. Because that stuff is bad news. I was probably using too high an angle because I was trying to avoid these two chips. So I either need a different tip for that, or just to use a different technique entirely. At any rate, let's not dwell on it. It's also why I try and avoid hot air for these, because hot air on these aluminum caps can make them pop if you do it too much and for too long. not to mention all these plastic pieces in close proximity in this case would make that difficult. So the twist method probably would work fine. I don't like it much, but you know, I guess I don't have much room to speak after what just happened. And there's the snip method, but I feel like both of those are almost guaranteed to make a mess. Looks like it might be floating a little. Can fix that. Seems okay. Okay, well, let's do this through hole. That's the big guy here. And we're nearly done with the recap portion. Small leg is the minus. Oh, you can't see. Short leg is the minus. Stripe is the minus. Put it through. Flip it over. Bend it a little bit because we don't want to find out that we're floating on the other side when we come back. Let me fix this for you if I can. Small bit of flux. And this is why I didn't clean the other side yet, because that small bit of flux will go right through the holes. Looks good. We just snip. Right there. These legs can be handy to keep around in some cases. You can use them as a jumper and do repairs, and occasion they're like nice stiff wire. Okay, now we finished that. We can clean up some of this flux mess. Okay. So that leaves us with only two things left. I'm gonna put this aside a second. The soundboard. We just have these two to do. Nintendo and Sony. Don't see that. Up the Hako. It'll take a minute, but let's see if I can back this up high enough so that it'll focus for you. We're going after these two and these two correspond to the capacitors. Everything else is a via. The only other through hole piece is this. So I'd like to make sure I know I'm definitely looking at the right pins. You can see the proximity to the pins for the connector here. So we'll hit those in a second. The gun takes longer to warm up than the soldering iron, but I think we're ready now. So you just go over it. See how quickly let it soak through a bit, and you suck it out. See how clean that gets? Let it go through a bit, wiggle. Good. And look, capacitor fell out, didn't even touch it. That's how this usually goes. And because it's so fast, we don't transfer heat to the capacitor. It doesn't really give it a chance to burst. That's why I like to use the gun. Already falling out. And they're both out. I was trying to get the same effect from the tweezers, but to be honest, it's the first time I've used tweezers, so I probably have to refine my technique. They are both the same thing. Where we got the rating? There we are. 10 volt, 47 microfarad. 10 volt, like 47 microfarad. And comparing, just to be sure, 10 volt, 47 microfarad. Sometimes they give you a replacement capacitor that's a higher voltage rating. That's okay, as long as the microfarads are correct. Okay, so take a close look. We can see the positive indicator here. So we put the longer leg through that hole. And reach underneath to bend the legs a bit so that it's nice and straight-ish. Do the same here. Here's our positive indicator. So we put the positive leg through, and then the negative, and feel underneath. Try to get it a little bit straight. It's really not important, but we go to the underside. We're going to use a little bit of flux and then just seal them in. Right, looks great. Now we cut the legs, make sure they don't look too stupid on this side. And, you know, we were really picky. We could straighten that a little. But they have like V legs underneath. Flush cutters. This is so few capacitors compared to some consoles I've done. think the Xbox was like 3 times as many. I'd have to. It certainly felt like it, at least. Even the Genesis, I think, is a lot more than this. That should be good. Let's clean up the flux. Okay, so that leaves us with one last thing to do. I mentioned it earlier, but they give us an extra capacitor intended for use on this power rail here. Because of the angle, it's going to be hard to show it to you. But I'm going to try to, well, I'm not going to try to, I am going to solder the last capacitor onto its legs. I'm not going to be able to show it to you too well because I don't want to bend this rail. Can't really rate. The microscope is a microscope. It doesn't pull back too far. Not the best I can do, but I can't. I've got the board propped way up for this. It's not great, but we'll try it. All right. So according to console 5, what we need to do is take this capacitor and arrange it so the middle leg goes here. What is that? Dust crap? Gross. And the positive is around here. So that shouldn't be too difficult to do. What I'm going to do is bend the legs on this capacitor, like so. How does that look? I feel like that's threatening too much to touch. I don't like it. It'd be kind of a disaster if that touched. All right, forget the hook idea. We're just gonna go straight on. Let's keep it simple. So essentially what we want is that, right? So let's use our tack-on technique. All right, guys, sorry, I need to do this off camera, I guess, because I can't get this at an angle where I can work on it and show it to you. Sorry. All right. What does that look like? Looks like it'll do the job. It's not flimsy. It's not bridged. Okay, so sorry about the lack of visibility on some of that stuff at the end there. But we have our power rail modified in place. All the capacitors are nicely replaced. I think it's time to start reassembling what we have here and giving it a test. This Super Nintendo video ran longer than I expected after editing, so I decided to split into 2 parts. We'll stop here at the end of the soldering, and we'll do the assembly into the new shell next time. See you there.